mythic items. We have the good, we have the bad, and the ugly. In this video, I want to rate each and every mythic in the game, not in terms of how strong they are in the meta or anything, but in terms of how fun and well designed they are as items, just to show them some appreciation, or whatever the opposite of appreciation is, before they get removed in Season 14. Before we start, I think it's very important to say that this is my very own, incredibly biased opinion, so if you completely disagree and think I'm stupid, flame me in the comments all you want, or better yet, go to the link in the description and make your own tier list. Tag me on Twitter when you post it. Also, this video is going to be quite a bit different compared to the others in this channel, as you can probably notice, but I'll be going off my meds for this one. Off script, I meant off script. So here we have our little tier list, and we shall begin with Heartsteel. These are not ordered in any particular order, by the way. S tier is going to be the tier where the item is, well, revolutionary or whatever. It's very fun to play, it's interesting design, and I think Heartsteel belongs in A. Why? Well, it's very simple. It's a stacking item. I like stacking, and it stacks not only HP, but it converts your HP onto the passive damage of the Heartsteel. And it's like, there's that synergy, right? When you play Dr. Mundo, you want to have as much HP as possible. Heartsteel lets you stack HP, so you can be tanky. Mundo has his passive that converts HP into AD, and then you can build Titanic Hydra, and it just has this synergy, you know? It has a complete little build that you can do around Heartsteel. And I think that's what Mythics should do. They should define your playstyle, they should define your build, and Heartsteel does exactly that. The only reason why I'm not putting it in S tier... No, actually I'm gonna put it on S tier, fuck it. I like Heartsteel a lot, if you could tell. The one tank item that I do not like, however, is Even Shroud. I'm struggling whether to put this on C or D, sincerely, because it's just a tank item where you immobilize someone, they take more damage. It's kind of like old Abyssal Mask, except this time it's AoE around the target you immobilize, and they take more damage from everyone in your team. Honestly, D tier. D tier is just boring. It's boring. It's what, 6%, 7% more damage? Who cares? Who cares? If you CC them with Nautilus, they're gonna be dead anyway. Rocket Belt. Rocket Belt is super fun. It's a dash that shoots out a little shotgun, a little spread of projectiles, and it gives you an auto reset and movement speed. So it basically enables champions like Evelyn and Galio to, well, exist, and it amplifies the abilities of someone like Echo. With the auto reset, he can proc his 3-hit passive way more easily. S tier. It's a fun item, it's interesting, and it has an active. And I do love my actives. Speaking of actives, Locket of the Iron Solari, I like it a lot more than Even Shroud, even though they are kind of similar in terms of stats. Solari is more about keeping your teammates alive rather than keeping yourself alive and immobilizing people. It's great against AoE, it's great against Karthus ult, for example. I like it. It's an A. It's an active. I do like actives. I know, I'm biased, but hey. It's a fun, interesting tank item. What more could you possibly want? Night Harvester. This thing is just worse Ludens. If it wasn't for the bloated stats, like, what does it give? 400 HP, 25 ability haste? That's preposterous. But that's to compensate, because its passive is Ludens, but worse. So I'm gonna put it on D tier, because it's just stats, really. It's just haste. You know who builds it? Vlad builds it. Why? Because he needs the haste and the HP. Akali might build it because it gives more burst and ability haste, but she will probably prefer to play Rocket Belt anyway and, you know, have an additional dash to her 18. Night Harvester just doesn't offer anything. Liandry's. Liandry's is a fun item to play, I think, in almost every mage, because it gives good haste, and the burn is interesting for applying stuff like anti-heal or Rylai's. However, Liandry's does have a wee problem. It has a second passive that not a lot of people talk about, that aside from the max HP % burn, it also gets bonus damage against people building bonus HP. That bonus damage is gonna do like a 10th of the damage the burn does. It's almost irrelevant. So I'm gonna put this on B tier, just because it has a passive on it that's practically wasted, because if you deal bonus damage to people building bonus HP, and you have a burn that scales on enemy max HP, then why are they on the same item? Wouldn't it be better to just buff the burn and take away the passive, or buff the passive, take away the burn. The burn is too iconic though, so the passive is just there for some reason. Nobody even notices. Because in a 30-minute game, it's probably gonna deal like 500 damage. Ludens is Night Harvester, but better. It gives movement speed when you proc it. You can refresh the cooldown by 0.5 seconds every time you hit someone with a spell. And low cooldown mages, like Cassiopeia, are probably not gonna build it. But if you do build it, every single spell cast is gonna refresh the Ludens cooldown. So you can do some really interesting DPS builds with this, despite it being a burst item. And the movement speed feels really nice. I'm gonna put it on A tier. Riftmaker. Riftmaker is the AP bruiser item. And I say the because Rod of Ages is quite niche and it doesn't work on Mordekaiser and Gwen, who are half of the AP bruiser cast. Riftmaker is essentially their only option. Who else builds Riftmaker? I can't really tell you from the top of my head. I used to build it on Azir, it was fun when it lasted, but durability patch made it irrelevant. I'm gonna put it on B tier because it's an interesting item. It gives Omnivamp on an AP item, which is extremely rare, and it gives true damage based on pre-mitigation damage, so it's actual true damage and not just bonus damage. That said, it could stand to have like a second passive. I don't know what it would be. I don't know, maybe scaling the true damage based on your max HP, something like that, just to incentivize you to build Bruiser rather than build this and then build mage AP items on Gwen. Echoes of Helia. This thing is basically a combination of old Moonlight Renewer and this new thing where it damages people, kind of like a Nami W, where you heal an ally. Casting abilities basically gives you 2 stacks of a little passive, and whenever you heal or shield an ally, they're gonna get those stacks as bonus healing, and a nearby enemy will take damage. That's mildly interesting, because it's an item it's doubling as an offensive item and a defensive sustain item, and it incentivizes you to build Enchanter, because the bonus healing on it only scales with heal and shield power. I don't really play Enchanters, I don't know how fun it is to build, I don't know how satisfying it is to play, but I'm gonna put it on B tier just because it's good enough. It's mid. Radiant Virtue is one of those items that I would love to put on S tier because I find it majorly satisfying. The one problem I have with it though is that it's kind of hard to notice in a hectic teamfight. Like let's say you're playing Shen and you build Radiant Virtue, you ult someone and they get your big ult shield. And then that shield's gonna deplete, they're gonna take damage, and you finally arrive. When you arrive, you're gonna give them healing. The healing you give them is very hard to notice in the heat of the fight. And so they're probably going to be flaming you for item choice, despite this being one of Shen's best items. And the same goes for Karma or Alistar or anyone who builds this. It makes you very tanky, it makes you very hard to kill, but the effect it gives your allies seems very minor. It's not, but it does seem that way, it does feel that way. So I'm going to put it on A tier, just because I like Crown of the Shattered Queen, regardless of strength, regardless of how piss shit of an item it is, I like Crown a lot. It's basically a super Banshees. You get this mega damage reduction shield that must be popped from safety. The problem is, there are so many ways to take this thing away before it can even do anything, that it's practically useless. Like, let's say you're playing against LeBlanc. You know, LeBlanc can easily pop this without committing, because she can just W in, Q you from a distance, point and click, and W out. And by the time her W and Q are back, your crown is still like 20 seconds of recharging. So goodbye, you don't have a mythic item for 40 seconds. But despite it being terrible, hear me out. I do like the option for AP champions to have this item that makes them safe, but at the cost of damage, at the cost of utility, and at the cost of being extremely difficult to keep up. If it didn't get popped by like a Ludens proc when someone's clearing the wave, it would probably be pretty strong, pretty interesting. I don't know how they could do that. Maybe if only champion ability and auto attack damage could pop it. Like if you couldn't pop it with just a Ludens proc on the wave, it would probably be a better item, a more interestingly designed item. Divine Sunderer. It's kind of hard to dissociate Divine Sunderer from Camille building it and dealing max HP true damage every 6 seconds like a Cho'Gath ult. But to be honest, in terms of design, I think it's pretty interesting. because it gives your champion an extra functionality in the Sheen thing. Whenever you cast an ability, your next auto attack is gonna deal max HP damage and heal you based on pre-mitigation damage. So it's an item that has a purpose against tanks. It works very well for that. The only problem I have with Sunderer is that it works a bit too well for things that aren't tanks. Have you ever seen a Camille jump on an ADC? Yeah, he's probably gonna get one shot. Because guess what? It doesn't matter that Divine Sunderer's damage is max HP % damage with pre-mitigation healing if she deals 1000 true damage regardless. And that goes for every Divine Sunderer builder, by the way, which are Fiora, who for some reason is just as good at killing squishies as she is killing tanks, and Jax, who also destroys everyone with this item while being unkillable because of the pre-mitigation healing, and he's using W every like 2 seconds because he builds Shojin and has no cooldowns. But regardless of how overpowered it is, I think it's an interesting item that does have its niche. It's not like a one-size-fits-all item, it's just a bit too good against non-tanks. Infinity Edge, straight into D tier. It's just damage. It's just a damage item. It's literally AD death cap. I hate this. I hate that crit ADCs are forced to build this piss shit item, because if they don't, they have no damage. And if they do, they have no attack speed, which they need. You know, they are ADCs, they are auto attackers, they need attack speed, but they cannot build this item without missing out on a lot of attack speed, especially because their items that do give attack speed are very low damage or have very low value passives, aside from Kraken's Lair, my beloved. I don't know, maybe this is why crit ADCs are shit in the current meta and everyone plays Rageblade and Gale Force. But that's just my 2 cents. Duskblade. Duskblade is certainly one of the assassin items ever made. I'm gonna put it on C tier just because it's extra ability damage based on missing HP. Alright, we get it. It's a burst item. So why does it give so much haste? Why does Duskblade lend itself to AD Mage Z playstyles when it's a burst item? When the passive is meant for burst. And then it makes you untargetable after you kill someone, which isn't that supposed to be like your most vulnerable time? When you just blew your cooldowns, you just killed someone, you are at your most vulnerable. Well, I guess you're not. Not anymore, you're untargetable now. Yeah, get out of jail free. It's just one item that negates one of the weaknesses that assassins and divers have, and the passive of bonus damage based on missing HP is directly contrasting with the ability haste identity that it has. Eclipse, on the other hand, I'd say is an A tier item because it's essentially the assassin item that you build when you don't have many squishies to burst. It's basically a bruiser assassin hybrid item, and that's why champions like Jace and Pantheon can build it, because it gives you percent penetration on the mythic passive, it gives you max HP % physical damage, which isn't as tank busting as Divine Sunderer, but you know, it's something that assassins have that give them a chance against tanks. It's kind of a jack of all trades style item. The only reason why it's not in C tier is because it does have a specific niche. It's not as good as Ghostblade and Duskblade to kill squishy ADCs and mages. It's just not. But it compensates by being better against bruisers and tanks. So yeah, it's an item that kind of defines your playstyle. That's what Mythics are supposed to be. A tier. Everfrost. My beloved. Why am I so biased for Everfrost? Because it gives you an immobile control mage like Vex, like Veigar, an extra tool to defend yourself. But unlike Crown, Everfrost requires you to land a skill shot. And it enables many champions to be more like utility carries, like it gives them more of a controller identity more than that of a burst mage, like AP assassin kind of thing. So basically, it's the item that you build on a mage whenever you know you're not gonna have enough damage to one-shot anyone, but you do need the CC to protect yourself. Like, let's say you're playing Vex in a side lane. You use your abilities to clear the wave, as one does, and what now? For the next 20 seconds, you are a sitting duck. Oh, guess what? Not with Everfrost. And you might think, hey, but isn't this hypocritical? Didn't you just say that Duskblade nullifying an assassin's weakness is bad, but Everfrost nullifying a mage's weakness is good? How come? The reason is that Everfrost doesn't have a conflicting identity. It doesn't pretend to be a burst item. It is a utility defensive item through and through, and it's meant for kiting and protecting yourself, and catching people off position. Iceborne Gauntlet, or Frostfire Gauntlet, I forget. This item gives tanks a sheen item of their very own, which wasn't a thing until Season 13. I believe it was Season 13, I'm not checking it. And it basically does what it did before, except the little slowdown AoE that you have is now much more frequent, and it gives tanks kind of a sheen proc based on base AD, which they have a lot of because they are tanks and are not supposed to build bonus AD. It's also a very specialized armor item, and it's pretty strong on champions like Malphite. Yeah, I know that from experience. So what would I rate it? I'd go with an A, because it's a specialized anti-AD armor. It has 0 magic resist. Nothing. It has HP, which helps against AP threats, but HP helps against everyone. 50 armor, though, makes it a nightmare for AD champions to deal with. And it can be decent against mages, because if you manage to get on top of them, what Iceborne does is that the more frequently you can cast abilities, the more frequently you can proc that little slowdown circle, which makes you much stickier and much more disruptive in a teamfight. Gale Force. I would very much like to put Gale Force in S tier along with Rocket Belt for very similar reasons. It's a non-targeted dash that deals damage. The problem I have with Gale Force is that if you dash away from someone, you also get the damage depending on how far you are from them. It doesn't have the Rocket Belt weakness of you either dash out and miss out on the damage of movement speed, or you dash in to engage, you get the damage and you get bonus movement speed. It has kind of a trade-off. Gale Force doesn't have that weakness. It basically removes one of the ADC's biggest weaknesses, which is they are immobile. Well, guess what? They aren't immobile anymore. And that dash doesn't really have any cost to it. It has a long cooldown. It doesn't have Rocket Belt's trade-off of you either use it to run away or you use it to deal damage. Gale Force will let you run away and deal damage at the same time. So I'm gonna put it on A tier. No, actually, you know what? On B tier. Even though I love actives, even though I like Gale Force, it's just too good for its own good. It gives everything an ADC needs, except for maybe raw DPS, which IE would be better for, but IE is a boring item. Gore Drinker. Regardless of your feelings on the current meta, Gore Drinker, I'd say, is an S tier item. Bruises are supposed to be, they go in the middle of the fight, they have sustained damage, they have low cooldown, so they can keep using their abilities in the middle of everyone, and Gore Drinker enables them to stay in the fight for more time. The fact that its healing becomes way bigger when you strike multiple targets, think about it. It incentivizes you to be in the middle of the fight even at low HP, and incentivizes you to fight to the death. So you tailor your playstyle around that, and you play more of a frontline kinda diver who disrupts the entire teamfight and makes people focus on you, which is exactly what you want. Rageblade has a similar problem to IE, where it's just damage, but the fact that it nullifies your crit, it becomes on-hit. It's the on-hit mythic. It has a very specific niche, it requires you to build around it, and it has the weakness of not having crit. And some ADCs do have crit scalings, so building Rageblade does have a trade-off. The problem with it is that it's just weak at the moment compared to Trinity Force, because ADCs like Vayne, Twitch, Ashe, champions that could build Rageblade are building Trinity Force because it's straight up stronger. But in terms of design, I'd say Rageblade is an S tier item. It's perfect for ADCs who want hybrid damage, it's perfect for melting tanks, and it has the trade-off of low AD. It does give some AP, which not all ADCs want AP, believe it or not. And so it does have that trade-off. It does have its own niche, and if you don't build around that niche, you're gonna be screwed. Jack Show. It's a bit of a boring item in it. It's just, hey, I wanted an item that makes me hard to kill. How do you want to accomplish that? I take little damage. That's it. It does have that thing where standing nearby enemy champions will drain them and heal you, but that healing is even less noticeable than that of Radiant Virtue. However, it does have something that makes it a little more than just a stat stick, so I'm gonna put it on C tier. Moonstone. I had to do some research on it before making this video, because I didn't remember what it did. But essentially, it just amplifies healing and shielding, on one ally. And if this ally that you've just healed has someone else close to them, instead of amplifying the heal, it's gonna transfer part of that healing and shielding to this nearby ally. Is this even good enough to be a mythic? I don't know. I think it could be just a normal-as legendary item, and it would make no difference. It doesn't feel like a mythic. It feels so underwhelming. It's built mostly for champions who don't have anything better to build. Soraka, for example. What else are you gonna build on Soraka? Shrelia, so you can run away from the fight? But probably. Moonstone just doesn't feel like a mythic. It doesn't have the oomph to go there. It does give an interesting functionality, but I'm gonna put it on C tier just to be consistent with Jack Show, because it's basically the Jack Show thing of, I want to make my allies hard to kill. How do you want that? You heal them and shield them a lot. Things that you were already doing anyway. And it does have a little passive, it does have a little functionality that is very underwhelming. Yeah, C tier seems fair to it. Navori is straight up a more interesting item than the other ADC, than these two ADC mythics, because it has the trade-off of you have less AD, you have less attack speed, but it does give you ability haste, which is very rare on crit items, and it forces a playstyle around it. Rather than relying on your auto attacks, you're going to be relying mostly on your abilities. And that's great for champions like Ezreal. Lucian can build it sometimes, I've seen Tristana build it. So these are very different ADCs with very different playstyles, but they all use Navori. Also Gangplank, I almost forgot about it. Why do they build it? Because their abilities deal more damage based on how much crit they have. So it's a crit mythic that makes you build crit, but you're mostly going to be using your ability. And then it has that passive of your abilities dealing bonus damage based on crit in order to sustain it as a viable item. It's very fun, very interesting. I'm going to put it on S tier. Rod of Ages. God. I wanted this to come back, and then it came back, and I kind of regretted it, to be honest. It's just a boring stat stick. It gives a lot of HP, it gives a lot of mana, it gives good AP, and it gives a little bit of haste on the mythic passive when you build all the legendary items. Problem is, the healing it gives is based on mana spent up to a cap, which means you must be a low cooldown mage to use this item, which is perfect, you know, it's the battle mage item. But I feel like the passive kind of takes a backseat to just the stats it gives. It gives a fuck ton of HP, it's 600 on one item that gives 100 AP as well. Like, what? It does have the downside that it has to scale, it is time gated. Do you know that every 200 mana you spend with Rod of Ages, you get a tiny ass movement speed buff that you can't even choose when to use? Yeah. That is the reason why I'm gonna put it on C tier. It is a niche item, it forces a playstyle around it, its actual mythic passives are very underwhelming, and the level up it gives is just kind of there. I don't know why it levels you up, maybe to compensate for its shitty early game. It's just a bit boring. Shurelius. Shurelius kind of fixes the problem that I have with enchanter items. It gives you an extra functionality in that your buffs are now all. Every ability you use on an ally is going to give you both 20% movement speed. And it has an active that gives a lot of movement speed to everyone around you. So it's basically an enchanter's item that they build to give the entire team mobility. It gives an extra component to the entire team, and it doesn't do something that an enchanter would be doing regardless. Shurelius gives them an entirely new functionality, and it has an active that does have a component of timing to it. So I'm gonna put it on S tier. It's, I think, in my opinion, this is the most fun enchanter item in the game. Stridebreaker. It's very similar to Goldrinker, and it does have a niche. You want to run people down, and people do not want to stand their ground and fight against you. Because if they do, this is probably not the best item for you. If they don't, if they want to run away from you and you must catch up to them, then this is the best item for you. It's used on mostly like Garen, sometimes Nocturne, and mainly Darius, because it gives attack speed as well. I'd say it's easily an S tier item. It has an active. The cooldown is not very long, but the active is not really the only thing it has going for it. It gives you movement speed, which synergizes with what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be an item to run people down, then move everything around its design helps you run people down. I just put an item on S tier just because it does exactly what it says on the box. I like Stridebreaker. I don't like being on the receiving end, but it's a fun item. Trinity Force. It's what Divine Sunderer would be if it was a worse item. I'm gonna put it on C tier because it does have a Sheen proc, it does add a new functionality to your champion, but the passive of like, oh yeah, when you attack you gain bonus base AD, which is a stat. Trinity Force is only built because the stats are very good. Nobody gives a shit about what it does, they just know it does a lot of damage. Divine Sunderer, despite being a more controversial item for sure, does have some new functionality that makes it more interesting. Last and probably least, Youmuu's Ghostblade. It's not least actually, it is a more interesting item than Duskblade for sure. It just kind of falls short in terms of strength in the meta, but I'm gonna put it on A tier along with Eclipse, because it is a niche item that's very specific. It is a movement speed item on an active that lets you close the gap on people that do not want to be near you at any cost. And when you have it stacked, when you have the little shards stacked, they stack based on movement, which is something assassins like a lot. It gives you a lot of bonus lethality to just boom, burst someone with all your damage, and then you have no mythic for a while. Another thing that it does is give you out of combat movement speed, which I also like a lot because it helps you stack the shards. So it's an item where you want to always be in the outskirts of a fight, like prowling, looking for an angle. You found the angle, press the active, get the movement speed, unload your burst, get away from the fight. That is how assassins are supposed to work, and Ghostblade does exactly that. The only reason why I don't put it on S tier is because the effect of the shards is kind of hard to tell how much more damage you're doing with Ghostblade than you would be doing without it. It does give very nice stats, but it's hard to tell like how much these shards are giving me of extra damage that I wouldn't have if I didn't have this passive. So this is my tier list for all the mythic items in League of Legends. You probably think I'm either very, very stupid or very, very biased right now, but that is the reality of tier list videos. It's not like it's gonna matter for very long, because in Season 14 these are all gonna be gone. Tell me if you enjoyed this video in the comments, consider subscribing if you did, and I hope to see you on the next one. Cheers!